April 3rd, 1944. The kind of date you don't forget even if you want to. I remember the air first. It wasn't cold like winter. It was cold like the absence of life. Thin, dry, heavy in a way that doesn't make sense until you felt it inside a cockpit 24,000 feet above the channel. The kind of cold that seeps into your gloves, stiffens your jaw, and makes your thoughts echo louder than the engine. The kind of cold that doesn't just surround you, it isolates you. We had taken off before sunrise. A dozen of us, young, tired, pretending not to be scared. We flew tight, engines humming in a low chorus that sounded almost like confidence. But silence lives in places you don't expect. It hides behind steady routines, behind the checklists and the clipped radio calls, behind the metallic smell of oil and sweat. That day, the silence wasn't in our mouths. It was in our chests, pressing, waiting. And every man in that formation knew it, whether he admitted it or not. The sky was too clear for comfort. No clouds to duck into, no cover, just open blue stretching in every direction, like a stage that had been cleaned too perfectly for something unspeakable to play out. The kind of sky that looks peaceful until you realize how many men have died under one just like it. I glanced at the instrument panel. Everything was in the green. Fuel good, oil temp steady, oxygen flow normal. But it didn't feel normal. There was a tightness in my ribs, not pain, pressure. The kind of pressure that builds quietly in your chest and makes every breath feel like a decision. I remember adjusting the mask, not because I had to, but because it gave my hands something to do. We were headed toward occupied France. Mission brief said a German rail yard just outside Rouen. Simple, in theory, in and out. Clear target, expected resistance. I remember the officer saying that last part with a smirk, like it was some sort of joke. Expected resistance, as if flak and fighters were just background noise, as if men didn't die on simple missions all the time. That morning, I wasn't afraid of flak. I wasn't afraid of fighters. What I felt was different, harder to name, like the world was leaning a little too far to one side, and I was the only one who noticed. Every time I blinked, I expected to open my eyes and see fire. My heart was calm, but my hands wouldn't stop twitching. My mouth was dry, but my palms were soaked. That's the part they never talk about in the movies. The imbalance. The quiet panic that doesn't scream, but hums, low, steady, like a wire about to snap. I looked left. Frankie's plane was right where it should be. His gloved hand lifted briefly, a lazy salute through the glass. We were both 19. He looked relaxed. Maybe he was, or maybe he was better at pretending. Either way, I nodded back. A small gesture, but in that moment, it felt like an anchor. Like if he was still real, then maybe I was too. I wish I could say I was thinking about freedom, or duty, or the flag. But I wasn't. I was thinking about the last letter from my mother, about how she ended it with, "Please be careful," in that handwriting that shook a little more every month. I was thinking about a girl named Clara, and the way she used to fold notes in my locker. I was thinking about how strange it was that I might never hear another song again, never taste coffee again, never laugh. That's what the pressure does. It makes you imagine the end of everything ordinary, and it makes you miss it before it's even gone. The channel beneath us looked like glass, calm, silent. 1,000 feet below, the sea didn't care about our mission, didn't care about the war, didn't care about the boys in tin machines with heavy hearts and tired eyes. The sea just waited. It always waits. Then I felt it. Not a sound, not a jolt, just a shift inside me, like something deep down knew before I did. My breathing slowed, my vision narrowed, and suddenly the cockpit, which had always felt like a machine, now felt like a coffin, a sealed chamber held together by rivets and hope. And for the first time that morning, I wondered if the rivets were enough. No one said a word. The radio was quiet. The engines droned on, unaware of the storm forming in my mind. But I could feel it, like the sky was holding its breath, like time had paused for just a second to ask me a question I didn't know how to answer. I gripped the stick harder than I needed to. My knuckles went white beneath the gloves. I wasn't afraid, not in the way people think. It wasn't fear of dying. It was fear of losing control, of losing myself before the fight even began, because no one tells you that sometimes the real battle starts before the enemy ever fires a shot. That day, I felt something I had never felt before. Not dread, not doom, something more precise. I felt the edge, the place where a man starts to unravel, just enough to know he's close to something he might not come back from. And I stayed there for a long time, longer than I should have. If you've ever been there, you know what I mean. If you haven't, I hope you never do. Tell me in the comments, have you or someone in your family lived through moments like this? Subscribe to the channel to help us share these untold memories with those who need to hear them. They trained us for everything except the one enemy we carried inside our own helmets. The manuals talked about oil pressure, engine failure, emergency dives, even how to bail out over the channel in freezing water. They told us how to fight Messerschmitts, how to break a tail chase, how to conserve oxygen on long climbs. But they never talked about what happened when the mind began to slip away from you inch by inch. At 25,000 feet, the air is thin enough to change the way you think, long before it changes the way you breathe. I remember feeling it that morning, like a slow tightening in my skull. Not pain exactly, more like the world shrinking around the edges. My vision narrowing into a tunnel and my thoughts behaving like they had minds of their own. Pilots used to joke about the pressure at altitude. They would say things like, "It will make a genius forget his own birthday," or "It will make a preacher curse like a sailor." But nobody ever said it in a serious tone, because acknowledging it meant admitting vulnerability. And in the war, vulnerability felt like a luxury no one could afford. The truth is that the cockpit could become the loneliest place on Earth even when you were flying wingtip to wingtip with 10 other men. The isolation did not come from being alone. It came from being trapped with the one thing you could not escape, your own thoughts. Some days your mind worked like a precision instrument, calm, sharp, steady. But other days something small could tilt it out of balance. A rough climb, a skipped breakfast, a night of bad sleep, or something as simple as a sudden rush of oxygen that made your heartbeat stumble. That morning my heartbeat was off by just enough for me to notice. It felt like a missed step in a staircase, subtle but wrong, enough to make my breath catch inside the mask. I checked the regulator. Everything looked normal, flow steady, gauge good. But my chest did not believe the numbers. It wanted more air than the hose could give. I pulled another breath, slow, controlled. Nothing changed. A strange buzzing started behind my ears like distant static from a radio that was not tuned to any station. Pilots were not supposed to panic. Panic was for civilians. Panic was for people on the ground. But the body does not care about pride. It reacts before the mind can argue with it. My fingers tingled first, a warm, prickling feeling that made me flex my hands on the stick. Then came the awareness that my heartbeat was too loud. Loud enough to make me think my headset had picked it up. I remember looking out at the horizon, trying to swallow the rising pressure. The sky looked the same as it always had. Pale blue, empty, harmless. But it felt like it was leaning in closer, like it could hear the thoughts I was trying to bury. That was when I heard it. A voice, soft, close. Not through the radio, not through the headset. It came from somewhere behind me where the fuselage ended and the tail began. A place where no human voice could ever exist. It said my name and nothing more. Just my name, calm, direct, not distorted, not echoing, not imagined in the way dreams feel imagined. It felt real enough to make every hair on my arms rise under my jacket. I jerked around so fast that my oxygen hose tugged at my cheek. There was nothing there, of course, just the aluminum ribs of the cockpit and the hum of the engine rising and falling like a mechanical heartbeat. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the altitude, just nerves. Just the air being too thin to think straight, but you cannot reason with something you felt that clearly. My pulse spiked again. My mouth went dry. The buzzing behind my ears deepened like someone slowly turning a dial. Men who had flown more missions than I ever would use to say that altitude revealed who you really were. It stripped away the bravado. It stripped away the training. It stripped away every mask you wore around other people. At 25,000 feet, it was just you and whatever truth lived at the bottom of your chest. Some men found courage there. Some found fear. Some found nothing at all. I found a voice calling me from a place where no voice should ever be. I tried to focus on the instruments again. on the small, reassuring glow of the gauges, on the steady numbers that meant life was still under control. But my mind kept drifting back to that whisper. It bothered me because it had been so gentle. If it had been harsh or frantic, I could have explained it away as panic. But it sounded like someone who knew me, someone who had been waiting just long enough to speak at the exact moment my grip on myself weakened. I remember glancing to my left, hoping to find reassurance in seeing Frankie beside me. His plane was still there, perfect formation, steady wings, but he would never know what was happening inside my cockpit. We were trained to sound unbreakable on the radio, calm at all times, professional, composed. Even when your lungs were screaming and your vision was burning at the edges, I never said a word. I never keyed the mic. I just kept flying and tried to pretend the world had not tilted under me. The worst part was not the whisper. The worst part was what happened after. Because there was a moment when I wondered if maybe the voice was not outside me at all. Maybe it was a part of me that I had ignored for too long. Maybe it came from the cracks that had formed after too many missions and too many close calls. Or maybe it came from the fear I refused to name. That question lingered inside the cockpit heavier than any enemy fire. If you have ever felt your mind slip in a moment where it should have been strongest, then tell me your experience in the comments. Share your story and join our community by subscribing. Every voice here helps keep these memories alive. It didn't start with gunfire. It started with silence breaking in the wrong direction. One moment we were gliding in formation over northern France, calm in that strange way only a pilot knows. The next, the wind shifted, not a real wind, but the sound of it tearing unnaturally fast across the canopy. A disruption, something bigger than us, moving faster than it should. I didn't need to see it to know what it was. Every nerve in my body had trained for this moment. My blood knew it before my eyes confirmed it. FW Wonder 90s. German fighters, fast, brutal, and confident. They weren't coming to scare us, they were coming to end us. They came in high from the sun. It was classic Luftwaffe, the same tactic they had used since the beginning of the war. Dive from altitude, hit hard, disappear. It worked because it made sense. Surprise and speed always worked. We were cruising level, engines humming, radios quiet. They came down like ghosts, like the sky had spat out a handful of metal phantoms just to remind us that we were not in control. My leader barked something in the radio, sharp, urgent, but I couldn't understand it. Too much static, too much chaos. By the time I tried to adjust the frequency, it was already too late. A burst of tracers sliced through the air in front of me, like orange ropes being whipped across glass. Frankie's plane banked hard left. Someone behind me screamed into their mic, but it was swallowed up by interference and engine noise. The world broke apart in a single heartbeat, and suddenly everything we knew was gone. And then it came back, that voice. Not on the radio, not from the intercom. It came from behind me again, but this time it didn't say my name. It just said one thing: turn now. It was low, steady, and quiet, but it cut through the noise in my head like a knife through cloth. No static, no echo, no fear. Just those two words. I didn't think. I didn't reason. I just pulled the stick hard and to the left. The plane groaned beneath me. Not a scream, but a deep, slow protest. G-force pushed my body into the seat like it was trying to bury me alive. I clenched my teeth. My stomach flipped. My vision narrowed again. But I turned. And just behind where I had been flying, not 1 second before, a wall of tracers ripped through empty air. If I had not moved, they would have gone right through the cockpit, through my spine, through everything. I should have died in that moment. But I didn't. The sky was chaos, metal crossing metal, trails of smoke and light twisting in the blue like some kind of angry ballet. Our formation had disintegrated. Everyone scattered, trying to evade, trying to stay alive. No one was attacking, not yet. We were all just trying to survive the opening blow. The Germans knew this. It was what they did best. Ambush, disorient, then pick us off one by one. I saw a P-47 tumble out of control off to my right. Its tail was gone, just gone, torn away like paper. I didn't see a chute. I didn't see any smoke. It just vanished behind a bank of clouds that looked too peaceful for what they were hiding. That kind of thing stays with you, not the impact, not the sound, but the way something disappears, the way a friend can vanish like they were never there. One second you're flying next to them. The next, there is nothing but blue and memory. I leveled off for a moment and scanned the horizon. My hands were shaking, but my eyes were locked in. I didn't know who was still flying, didn't know if Frankie had made it through the opening strike. I couldn't ask. Talking on the radio now would only give my position away. I had to trust he was still out there. Somewhere. I knew I had seconds, maybe less. They would come back. That was the pattern. Strike. Circle. Re-engage. They loved to hunt from above. P-47s were strong, thick-skinned brutes, but we were never meant to dogfight with German fighters. Our edge was dive speed, not agility. If we got caught in a turning fight, we were as good as dead. I dove, not because I saw them, not because I heard them, but because I felt them, like a sixth sense, something from deep down telling me to get lower. I nosed over hard and let gravity do the rest. The plane picked up speed fast. It was like falling with wings. The wind screamed louder than the engine now, and I kept my eyes glued to the altimeter and the sky above. And they were there, a pair of them, circling back, looking for a second kill. I caught their silhouettes just as I dipped beneath a cloud bank, two shadows slicing across the light, smooth and controlled, too smooth. These weren't rookies. They knew what they were doing. I could almost hear them breathing in their cockpits, calm, focused. They had done this before, but I was still alive. And something about that made the fear feel different. It wasn't panic anymore. It was clarity, the kind that only comes when you realize you just beat death by half a second. Every sound felt sharper, every color more intense. The stick in my hand was no longer part of the machine, it was part of me. I rolled hard left, cut the throttle for a breath, then kicked it back up again. I couldn't see anyone from my group, no wings to fly with. Just me, the clouds, and the memory of a voice that had no source. Maybe it was my mind. Maybe it was just instinct filtered through stress. But that voice had saved me. Turn now. The words still echoed between my ears as I dropped to 10,000 feet and leveled off over the patchwork fields of Normandy. The ground looked calm from up here. Rows of farmland, thin roads like veins, smoke rising in the distance where something had already burned. And somewhere behind me, those two German fighters were still circling. I knew they would come again. They always did. You don't have to be a soldier to understand moments like this. If you have ever felt danger before it announced itself, if you have ever moved before you had time to think, I want to hear your story in the comments. Subscribe if you believe these memories deserve to be preserved, because some things are too important to forget. I pulled the stick with everything I had. My arms felt locked in place. The P-47 didn't turn on a dime like the light German fighters. It was a beast, heavy and stubborn, but when it moved with force. Every bolt and rivet in that airframe seemed to groan under the strain. The cockpit creaked. My bones did too. Then came the G's. People who have never flown under high G force think it's like a roller coaster. It is not. It is your body being pressed into itself, crushed by the very physics that keep you aloft. It is your blood trying to escape your brain, your heart pushing against a tide it can't hold back, and your vision darkening as the world narrows to a pinpoint. The first thing to go is your color vision. Everything fades to gray, then comes the weight, not around you, but inside you. Your limbs go heavy. Breathing becomes work. Thoughts slow down. It is like drowning while still in the air. As the turn tightened, my head began to tilt forward, not because I wanted it to, but because my neck could no longer resist the pressure. The horizon spun sideways and then up. My hand stayed on the stick, but I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. They were still moving, still obeying, but disconnected from everything else. That is when I felt it. A warm rush in my nose, thick, metallic. My upper lip caught it first. Blood, not much. Just enough to know that something inside was tearing, maybe a vessel, maybe nothing serious, or maybe the beginning of something worse. The thing no one tells you about blacking out in flight is that you don't go all at once. It happens in waves. First, your peripheral vision collapses inward, then sounds begin to distort. The engine that was roaring a second ago now sounds distant. Like someone turned the volume down, the world softens, not gently. More like it recedes, like it is choosing to leave you behind. I knew what was happening, but I couldn't stop it. I tried to blink hard. That was something they taught us. Blink, flex your thighs, tighten your core, do anything to force blood back toward your brain, but I was already too far in. The plane was still banking, the world still spinning, but I was floating somewhere just behind it all. And in that space between consciousness and blackout, I heard it again, a voice, soft, steady, familiar. Stay with me. Don't sleep. It didn't come through the radio. It didn't echo inside the headset. It came from inside my own skull, but not as a thought, as a whisper, gentle, present, clear. I don't know whose voice it was. It didn't sound like my crew chief or my instructor or my father. It didn't even sound like me. It sounded like someone who had always been there, waiting for this exact moment. Someone who knew that I was about to lose the fight and was trying to pull me back. Stay with me. I clenched my jaw, not because of pain, because it was the only thing I could still control. My body felt like it was floating in cement. My arms were dead weight. My legs were gone, but my jaw worked. And if that worked, maybe the rest would come back. I focused on that voice, on the rhythm of it, the way it repeated, slow and calm, like someone at my bedside refusing to let go. Stay with me. I began to hum. It wasn't a tune, just a low vibration, something to tie myself to, something real. The hum rattled in my throat like gravel, but it was enough. The darkness in my vision began to recede, just a little. The noise of the engine came back in patches like a radio tuning in and out of range. My hands were still on the stick. I adjusted the turn, leveled out. My breathing returned in short, panicked bursts. It sounded ugly in the mask, like an animal gasping, but I was conscious. Barely. I could feel my pulse again. Fast, erratic, but there. I wiggled my fingers. They responded. Not well, but they moved. I looked down and saw the red smear beneath my nose. My vision was still blurry. My body felt like it had been folded in half and wrung out. But I was alive. The G-force had let go of me, and somehow the plane had held together. They called it gray out, a step before blackout. Pilots passed out like this all the time during high-stress maneuvers. Some never woke up. Some crashed, still gripping the stick, faces frozen in place, eyes wide and empty. But I hadn't let go. And the voice, whoever it was, had kept me tethered to the world for just long enough. When I looked back up, the sky was clearer. Not physically, mentally. I could think again. I could process. My instincts returned first. I scanned the area, checked my instruments, adjusted trim. I did it all in a fog, but I did it. No one had warned me that the scariest part of flying wasn't dying from the enemy. It was fading out before the fight ever happened. It was losing the battle inside your own skull while your body sat strapped to a machine moving 400 miles per hour. I realized something profound in that moment. Bravery isn't always about charging forward. Sometimes bravery is the act of staying present, of staying awake, of resisting the overwhelming urge to surrender to the warm, creeping quiet that comes just before the end. And sometimes the thing that saves you is not training or muscle or even luck. Sometimes it is a voice, a whisper, a simple sentence repeated at just the right time, one that doesn't come from anywhere, but becomes everything. If you have ever been pushed to the edge of what your mind and body could handle, if you have ever come back from a place you were sure you would not return from, I want to hear your story in the comments. Take a second to subscribe and help us share these untold battles with those who carry them in silence. Your voice matters here. There is a strange thing that happens when you pass through fear and come out the other side. Not safety, not calm, but clarity. Everything becomes sharper. The noise falls away. The motion slows. And for a few fleeting seconds, you feel like you can see every moving part of the world at once. That is what happened to me after I came back from the edge. The sky was still a mess of smoke trails and scattered formations. I had no idea where my squadron was, no clue who had made it and who had not. But I could breathe again. I could move. And somewhere deep in the machinery of muscle memory and survival instinct, my training kicked back in. I rolled the plane gently to scan the area, eyes darting for movement, shadows, smoke, anything that might betray a threat, and I saw one, just a glimpse, a flicker of silver catching the light a few thousand feet above me. A German fighter, alone, banking left, probably searching for his next target. Maybe he thought the chaos had left no one alive down here. Maybe he was right. But not this time. I tightened my grip on the stick. The gloves were damp now. I could feel the sweat cooling against my skin. I adjusted throttle. trimmed my flaps. My plane, battered but responsive, groaned under the commands, and I began to climb, not steep, not desperate, just enough to set an intercept angle. I was no hero, no ace, but I was still in the fight. That had to count for something. As I rose toward him, I remembered every drill from training, every chalkboard diagram, every line drawn by a grizzled instructor who probably hadn't flown combat in years. Energy, altitude, speed, angle of attack, it all came rushing back, not as knowledge, but as reflex. My body remembered what my mind had forgotten. He had not seen me yet. Or maybe he had, and simply didn't care. One P-47 was not a threat to a fast mover like an FW-190 in open air. They could outturn us, outclimb us, dance around us if we gave them the chance, but what they couldn't do was dive away faster. That was our edge. The Jug was built like a tank strapped to a rocket. If we dove with purpose, nothing could catch us. I waited. Just another few seconds. I watched his pattern. Predictable, too smooth. He was alone and comfortable. That was his mistake. I dove, nose down, throttle wide. The engine roared like a wounded animal, and the plane screamed in delight. I could feel the acceleration, feel the pull of gravity working for me this time. The wind lashed at the canopy, howling with a voice all its own. The altimeter spun. The needle trembled. But I was locked in. He saw me late. I could tell by the way his plane jolted mid-turn. He tried to bank hard, tried to loop out of my path, but I had already closed the distance. He had no time, no angle, just speed and fear. I squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber Brownings erupted with a thunder that shook the entire frame of the aircraft. 6 streams of fire poured from the wings, stitching across the air in angry golden lines. The recoil jerked the plane slightly, but I held steady. I missed the first burst. He juked just enough to throw off my aim, but I adjusted, led the turn, felt the distance, and squeezed again. This time I hit. The tracers caught his wing first, then the fuselage. I saw sparks, then flame, small at first, then angry. I did not cheer. I did not celebrate. I just watched. He rolled once, a hard, uncontrolled spin, then his canopy flew open. A figure leapt. Parachute. My eyes followed him down for a moment, tumbling, floating, shrinking into the haze below. I did not know his name. I would never know his story. But for that second, we were both just men trying not to die. I leveled off again. The radio crackled. A voice came through, garbled, faint, but real. Lead to all units. Regroup north. Repeat. Regroup north. I didn't respond. I just turned my nose north and flew. And then, almost without thinking, I spoke out loud. Still with me? No one answered. There was no one in the back seat, no co-pilot, no crew. But the question had to be asked. Because deep down I was not asking someone else. I was asking myself. Was I still here? Was I still whole? And more importantly, could I keep going? The smell of cordite lingered in the cockpit. The barrel heat made the air thick. The sweat had dried on my face. I tasted salt and metal. My hands ached from gripping the stick too hard. My body trembled without permission. And yet I felt more alive than I had in weeks. That is the strange truth about war. Sometimes survival feels like a betrayal, like you are living through something you are not meant to walk away from. But other times, it feels like defiance, like shouting into the abyss and daring it to answer. That day, it did not answer, and that was enough. I wonder how many pilots made it home because of a decision they did not fully understand, a maneuver they didn't remember making, a bullet that should have hit but didn't, a voice they heard that no one else did. Maybe that is how fate works, not with grand declarations or dramatic rescues, but with small, invisible moments, with half a second of instinct, with a grip tightened just in time, with a whisper that says, "Not yet." If you have ever trusted something inside you that made no sense at the time, but saved you anyway, share it in the comments. If this story reminds you of someone who fought their own battles, whether in war or life, subscribe to keep their memory alive. These are the moments that built us. Let's not forget them. The debriefing room smelled like coffee gone cold and metal, fatigued by too many hours in the air. My boots echoed against the linoleum floor as I stepped inside, slower than usual. The mission had ended, or at least the part with engines and tracers had. But something inside me was still turning. like my body was back on the tarmac while my mind was still flying over the smoke-stained skies of Normandy. A medic waved me over. No questions, just routine. He looked at the red stain below my nose and handed me a cloth without asking how it got there. I sat down and let him check my vitals. My pulse was elevated, my skin cold to the touch. He nodded as if confirming something he already suspected, scribbled a note, and said it without ceremony. Hypoxia. Until that day, I had only heard the word in training, back when it was a footnote in a textbook, a diagram on a chalkboard, back when it was hypothetical, back when I still believed I was built to handle anything. Oxygen deprivation at altitude, they called it. Subtle, dangerous, invisible, like drowning with dry lungs. The irony was brutal. We wore the masks, we checked the gauges, we trusted the green needles and the hiss of the regulator, but sometimes the system failed. Sometimes the mind failed, sometimes both. And when that happened, you didn't get a warning light. You got silence, confusion, voices that didn't come from anywhere. I asked the medic how bad it was. He shrugged, said it depended. Sometimes you blacked out and came back fine. Sometimes you didn't come back at all. Sometimes you kept flying for 10 minutes and had no memory of any of it. That hit me like a second impact. I had pulled the trigger on a man while my brain was slipping into a fog. I had flown a combat turn, lined up a shot, made a kill, all while bleeding from the nose and hearing voices that didn't belong in the sky. And the worst part was not how dangerous that was. The worst part was how normal it felt. I had not even realized I was losing control. That was the danger. You do not feel yourself slipping. You feel yourself adapting, adjusting, floating. The mask stays on, the dial stays steady, but inside, your awareness begins to fray at the edges. Thoughts disconnect, time stutters, reality blurs, and you still think you are fine. That scared me more than anything else. The medics had a name for the gray zone pilots entered during oxygen starvation. They called it the twilight state, not asleep, not awake, functioning just enough to react, but not enough to understand. Some pilots described it as peaceful. Others called it terrifying. One man said it felt like flying inside a dream where your hands moved, but you did not recognize them as your own. For me, it felt like being watched from inside, like something deep within had taken over the controls just long enough to get me through, and then vanished without a trace. I could not stop thinking about that voice. Stay with me. It had not sounded like panic. It had not begged or shouted. It had simply spoken steady and calm, like it had been waiting for the exact moment when I would need it. The doctor said hallucinations were not uncommon in hypoxia cases. He told me that pilots had reported everything from family members appearing on the wing to entire conversations with people who were not there. The brain, starved of oxygen, pulls from the deepest corners of memory. It creates patterns where none exist. It fills silence with imagined sound. But he could not explain why the voice had felt so specific, so intentional, so personal. I didn't tell him everything. I couldn't. There are things that sound too strange when said out loud. So I nodded, took the packet of salt pills and the recommendation to rest. But my mind was already somewhere else. That night, back in the barracks, I lay in my cot staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles. The noise was soft, comforting, repetitive. I replayed every second of the mission, every image, every sound, every moment that should have ended me. I thought about the black edges of my vision, the silence of the radio, the way my blood had tasted when it hit the back of my throat. And I thought about how close I had come to disappearing without even realizing it. I began to wonder how many others had gone the same way, quietly, without a warning, no smoke, no fire. Just a drifting descent into sleep, with their hands still gripping the controls. How many had heard the same whisper and never mentioned it? How many had come back without knowing how? The war did not give us time to process these questions. We flew, we fought, we survived, or we didn't. And in between, we filled the silence with dark humor and stronger coffee. But I carried that question with me long after the mission ended. Who had spoken? Was it memory, instinct, God, madness? Or was it me, a part of myself that rose up when the rest of me was failing? A voice that only appears when everything else goes quiet. Not a hallucination, but a reflex, a survival mechanism buried deeper than thought. I don't know. I will never know. But I do know that it worked. I am here. I made it through. And even if I never hear that voice again, I will remember it for the rest of my life. If you have ever been saved by something you could not explain, something beyond logic or reason, something that spoke to you when no one else could, leave a comment and let your story live here too. If you believe these moments deserve to be remembered, subscribe and be part of the ones who carry them forward. This is how we keep the truth breathing. The landing gear thumped against the ground harder than usual. It was not a textbook landing. It wasn't smooth or elegant. It was the kind of landing that said more about survival than skill. The kind that came from instinct and gravity finally agreeing to work together. I had touched down, but I did not feel grounded. My body was on the runway. My mind was still somewhere above the clouds, in a cockpit trembling under fire, in a sky that had whispered warnings I couldn't explain. They had to help me out of the plane. My legs buckled as I stepped down. Not from injury, from something harder to explain. The adrenaline had left me hollow, like someone had taken the scaffolding out of a building and it was still standing only because no one had pushed it yet. I could hear the mechanics around me shouting, asking questions. Some cheered, some just stared. I nodded back at them, gave a half smile, but inside I was far away. The flight crew started their checks immediately. Fuel, damage, bullet holes. One of them found the streak of dried blood on the seat cushion and gave me a glance. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. There was an unspoken rule in those moments. If it wasn't critical, it wasn't discussed. The medics came soon after, clipboard in hand, routine questions, name, rank, unit, last known coordinates. I answered them all without thinking. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. They led me toward the field tent, where the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the air smelled like antiseptic and canvas. The walls flapped gently in the wind, like even the structure wasn't sure if it wanted to stay standing. Inside, another medic took my vitals. He examined the dried blood, the slow heartbeat, the distant eyes. He wrote something in silence. I waited for the question, the one they were all thinking, but it never came. No one asked about the voice, not once. It was as if they knew or maybe didn't want to know. Maybe too many had already admitted too much. Maybe silence was part of the uniform, a protection measure, not from others but from the system. In those days, talking about what happened in the air was dangerous, not just for your reputation, but for your wings. Say the wrong thing, and you were grounded. Say too much, and you might never fly again. I understood why. We were machines with faces, tools of the mission. Emotion made us unreliable. If a man hesitated because he had heard a voice in his head or because he saw something that wasn't there, he was no longer useful. He was a liability. So we smiled when asked, we nodded when praised. We gave short answers and long silences. We wore our flight jackets like armor and stitched humor into our exhaustion. And when night came, we stared at the canvas above our bunks and listened to the wind flap through the seams like ghosts trying to speak. Back at the barracks, someone had left a cup of coffee on my locker. I never found out who. It was lukewarm by the time I drank it, but it grounded me. The bitter taste was real. The heat steadied my hands. Around me, the room buzzed with low conversation, stories of kills, narrow escapes, guesses about who made it back and who didn't. No one asked where I had been during the fight. No one questioned how I looked more like a man who had been in a car crash than in a dogfight. That night, I lay on my cot with the lights off, the bunk creaking slightly with every breath. I stared up at nothing, not the ceiling, not the stars, just the space where memory plays tricks, the place where the mind replays what it cannot forget, but doesn't fully remember. I tried to recall the moment when I knew I was safe. There wasn't one. There was no clear line between danger and relief. No switch flipped. Safety was not something I reached. It was something that slowly bled back into me, drop by drop, like warmth returning to frozen fingers. I thought about that voice again. It had vanished after the landing. I hadn't heard it in the tent. Not during the checkup, not in the barracks. It was gone, as if it had served its purpose and decided to leave. But the echo remained, not in my ears, in my bones, in the space where fear becomes faith in something you can't name. I knew I couldn't talk about it, not there, not yet. But I also knew I wasn't the only one. Some of the older pilots, the ones with lines cut deep into their faces, looked at me that night like they recognized the silence I carried. Not pity, not sympathy, recognition. They had heard it too, maybe not the same voice, maybe not in the same moment, but something, some presence that spoke when no one else could. There was one man, older than the rest, who walked past me as I sat alone near the hangar. He didn't stop, didn't speak, but as he passed, he tapped twice on the top of my helmet. Not hard, just enough for me to feel it. You're still here. That is what it meant. I'm still here. We're still here. And sometimes that was enough. That night I wrote a letter I never sent. I addressed it to no one. I filled it with words I couldn't say aloud, about the fear, about the voice, about the feeling that something sacred had touched me in a machine built for war. I folded it once, slid it into the lining of my flight jacket. It stayed there for the rest of the war. If you have ever carried something in silence because the world around you wasn't ready to hear it, leave a comment and share your story. And if you believe that some truths are worth telling, even when they sound impossible, subscribe to this channel and help keep those truths alive. We are more than the uniforms we wore. We are the things we carried quietly. Some memories do not fade. They settle. They wait. They become part of you, quiet and patient, like dust in the folds of an old uniform. And when the noise dies down, when life slows and the world finally gives you silence, they return. Years passed. Wars ended. Flags changed. The machines were retired, displayed in museums, stripped of the violence that once echoed in their metal frames. People looked at them like relics of another time, walking past them with curiosity, but not comprehension. But to me, they were never just planes. They were rooms where young men met fear and chose to keep flying anyway. They were altars in the sky where we made promises to ourselves, sometimes to return, sometimes just to hold on a little longer. I've sat in auditoriums and told parts of this story. I've stood at memorials and read the names of men who never got the chance to tell their own. I've watched younger generations look at old black and white photos and ask questions that have no easy answers. But there is one question that always comes. Did the voice ever come back? And the truth is no. Not like that. Not in the sky. Not in the mask. It only spoke once. In that single moment, when I needed it most, a whisper that pulled me back from the edge, and then it was gone. Like fog retreating with the morning, but the memory of it never left. I have carried that whisper with me through years of peace that never quite felt peaceful. Through family dinners where I smiled and passed the potatoes, while still hearing echoes of propellers in my mind. Through nights when fireworks cracked open the sky and my hands clenched instinctively, through moments of joy shadowed by the knowledge that not everyone made it to feel them. Some men brought back medals, some brought back injuries. I brought back a sentence. Stay with me. It became a kind of mantra, a reminder for those moments when grief pulled heavy, when doubt crept in, when the weight of years and silence became too much. I would hear it, not as sound, but as presence, the part of me that refused to give up even when my own mind was unraveling. I do not know if the voice was divine or psychological or something else entirely. Maybe it was a memory, a piece of my soul stepping forward when everything else stepped back. Maybe we all carry voices like that inside us. Maybe we just don't hear them until the noise is stripped away. But what I do know is this: it saved me. And I believe that every person, whether in war or in life, will one day stand on that same edge, whether it is in a cockpit or a hospital room or alone in their thoughts at night. We all face moments where we must decide whether to fade or fight, whether to disappear quietly or hold on just long enough to see morning again. If you ever find yourself there, I hope you hear your voice too, not in panic, not in fear, but in stillness, in calm, a simple sentence that says, you are not alone. Stay with me. I do not tell this story to glorify war. There was nothing glorious about it. There was blood and fire and absence. There were empty chairs at dinner tables that stayed empty long after the flag stopped waving. But there was also courage. Not the loud kind, not the kind written about in books, the quiet kind, the kind that sounds like a whisper in your head when you are too weak to speak. If this story touched something in you, I want to thank you for listening, for remembering, for carrying this with me. Leave a comment if you have ever been through something that words struggle to explain. If someone ever pulled you back from a place you didn't think you would return from. I read every message. You are not alone. Subscribe if you believe that stories like these still matter, that remembering has value, that silence deserves a voice. And when the next video appears on your screen, click it. Let the stories continue. Because they are not just stories. They are pieces of us. They are echoes that deserve to live beyond memory. Thank you. Keep going. Stay with me.